So I'm going to talk to you about a couple things today. About Alaska, where we are in Alaska, a little bit of history of Alaska. It's going to help us determine where we want to go as a state. We're going to talk about some of the changing politics that's occurring across the country, but it's kind of always affected Alaska, but just may increase in its, I don't know how to word this, frequency and pressure on Alaska to potentially change the way we are and the way we do business. So first of all, I want to thank all of you for allowing me to speak today, and I want to thank you for what you do. You are the business community. You are the private sector. I know that there are some nonprofits here, but there's a lot of private sector folks here as well. And I'm not saying nonprofits don't do a great job. They do a great job for their constituents, but private sector is also what creates the wealth for us in the state to get our revenue, to help pay for our programs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So I really want to talk to you about Alaska's future because I can't determine Alaska's future on my own. The legislature really can't determine it on its own. We need all of us, all of you, to help form what Alaska's future is going to be. We know what Alaska's past has been for the past 40 years, and that's been based upon oil. And so what is this going to look like in the future as we look out 5, 10, and 15 years? So I'm going to read from a prepared text. I'll deviate off of that every once in a while. And at the end of this, I hope you do ask a lot of questions because I tried to shorten this up to give you more time to ask questions about where we're going, what's happening with the budget, aspects of the budget, where do we see the future of Alaska headed. I'll start off by saying I'm really bullish on Alaska, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why. So I want to talk to you about the future. I strongly believe that Alaska's long-term solution to anything, including our fiscal issues, is the private economy, the private sector. That's you people. The ability to grow the private sector is crucial to the long-term well-being of any state, including Alaska. So when you have a strong economy like they do down south, Lower 48 has, in many cases, a very diverse economy. It depends on what state you go to, but nonetheless, you'll have an agriculture sector, an industrial sector, a travel sector, a manufacturing sector. Alaska has been pretty limited and narrow as to what our sectors are up here. We have some pretty good growing sectors, sectors that are growing rapidly. Travel, for example, the tourism industry is one example that is creating a lot of jobs and a lot of wealth and is projected to grow. But Alaska has been pretty narrowly focused, probably for most of its existence, on a few resources. And for the past 40 years, it's been oil. So what I'm going to be doing over the next several weeks is I'm going to be going to every community I possibly can in the state of Alaska, starting with this conversation today. And I will be visiting every community to talk to folks in those communities what they think Alaska should look like. I'll be meeting with chambers. I'll be meeting with tribes. I'll be meeting with school districts. I'll be meeting with boroughs and cities. I'll be meeting with individuals. And at the end of these meetings with these groups in the cities and the boroughs, small towns, big towns, we'll have a town hall. So the people can come and let me know what services they really value. For us to understand where we're going to go with the future of Alaska, we have to understand how did we come to possess Alaska here in the United States. So right after the Civil War, I mean there was talk before the Civil War, but right after the Civil War, a guy by the name of William Seward, who was Lincoln's Secretary of State, pushed for Alaska to become a possession of the United States. And he did it for two reasons. One was the potential for wealth, resource wealth. And the other was the geopolitical issues of the time. Our location on the globe in between Russia and British North America, which was Canada at that point. And we all know the story. We bought Alaska for how much? People are mumbling. They're not really sure. $7.2 million. How many cents an acre? 2 cents an acre. We got a deal on it. And initially, the biggest money maker in Alaska was what? Does anyone know? St. Paul Island, the fur seals, the American Whaling Company, American Sealing Company. That was the biggest money maker in Alaska at the time. But Seward had a vision. Seward knew that there was an immense opportunities in Alaska: fish, gold, timber, furs, of course. But he also saw it as a way to check the British in North America, as a way to fulfill at the time, this was the end of the thing called Manifest Destiny, moving west and the north, but also the ability for that to be a storehouse. And this is important to remember, because what's happening to Alaska today is contrary to what Seward envisioned. What's happening to Alaska today, because as a result of a lot of political changes in the lower 48 and across the globe with regard to the environment and what type of energy sources and what type of energy are we going to be having here in this country, in this world, because of those discussions, there's a lot of pressure on Alaska right now. Some of you may have noticed that I've been having a conversation with Goldman Sachs. Because Goldman Sachs came out and said that we are not going to invest in projects in the Arctic, especially oil, is what they told us. We had a conversation with them a couple days ago. Some of their folks are going to come up to Alaska and have a discussion with us. But what's happening in the lower 48, as you know, if you're watching the news or reading the newspaper, it's been a bit of a break. My name hasn't been in the newspaper in a while, so I think we're going to be seeing more national news here for maybe another couple of weeks. But anyway, you're seeing that there is a big discussion and a big push to shut down fossil fuel extraction, including oil, certainly coal, but including oil. And now there's discussions of even doing that with gas, which 5 years ago we thought was a clean energy source. Folks are now talking about doing that with gas. If anyone is reading about what's happening in the state of New York, Pennsylvania is drowning in gas. The Marcellus shale gas field is right there in Pennsylvania. New York has part of that too, as well as the Utica gas fields. But because of political considerations, there's no pipelines in New York. So right across the border from Pennsylvania, folks in New York are paying more for energy than they need to. As a matter of fact, last year, for the first time, a tanker came from Russia and delivered gas to Boston because at this stage of the game, a pipeline cannot be put across the state of New York. And so it's not because they've run out of fuel in New York, and it's not because we're going to be running out of resources in Alaska, but the changes are purely political at this point. And they're really going to start to focus, I'm afraid, but it's happening now, on Alaska. You remember what happened in September. The city council in Seattle took a vote. The city council in Seattle took a vote that they were not going to do business with any outfit that did business with Alaska dealing with ANWR, Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. City Council of Seattle. Can you imagine for a moment if we took a vote in our legislature and said, we want the state of Washington to cease any growing of wheat. We want them to stop any manufacturing of airplanes. Boeing is located there. And we want them to stop any manufacturing of software because we're offended by that and we believe it impacts the environment in a negative way. I don't think we could imagine saying that, but we have towns and cities and groups that are constantly doing this. And they're doing it, they're making a lot of money off of it. And a lot of the NGOs and the CEOs of these NGOs are being paid handsomely to use Alaska as a poster child to stop development. Again, I bring this up because our history, the history of Alaska, it was all predicated upon our location, which is a resource, which I think is going to come into play more and more year after year, and I'll explain that in just a moment. But also our resources, our natural resources. And it's somewhat ironic that this is happening because Alaska has 15 of the 23 identified rare earths that are needed for this new economy that people are talking about that will succeed the fossil fuel economy. Keep in mind that the energy of the future is going to be electricity just like it is today. The question is how are we going to produce that electricity? Right now we produce electricity for the most part through coal, this is worldwide, oil, gas, and renewables. Hydro, probably followed by solar and wind, or wind and solar in that order. In order to produce those renewables and to store that energy, you need batteries. You need batteries for when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And oftentimes those batteries are composed of rare earths. And Alaska has a lot of rare earths. But if we can't develop our resources to create wealth for Alaskans, to provide jobs for Alaskans, to provide wealth and revenue for Alaska, to be able to pay for programs, a lot of social programs that people want, how are we going to make a go of it? That's the question that we all need to ask ourselves. And how are we going to help if, in fact, there's going to be a new economy in the future, one based less on fossil fuels, but based on still on electricity? Because if we can't mine and we can't drill, what is Alaska going to do? Again, this would be like telling the state of Washington, you can't do 90% of the major parts of your economy, the sectors in your economy, so your people can have a living, create wealth, and provide revenue for the state of Washington. It would be unheard of. But we've been dealing with this forever. Probably starting in the 1960s and 70s, and it's ramping up now. And what I'm asking folks here in the audience to think about as we go through this process is, what kind of Alaska do you want for the future? What is the future of Alaska? Our motto is what? It's another quiz to see if you're awake. What's our motto? North of the future. North of the future, right. Are we going to continue with that motto, or is it going to be north to the great park? The great American park. Is that what we're going to be looking at? North to the great park. Because this may be the first state, if we are not allowed to develop our resources, and it's happening now. If we are not allowed to develop our resources, do we end up potentially slipping into receivership? In other words, back into the orb of the federal government more and more, where we have to rely on their receipts to pay for a state? A state, by the way, which once again was brought into the United States as a possession because of its enormous wealth. Are we going to end up being a state that the federal government oversees, that we don't develop, yet push industries overseas to places like China and Southeast Asia, South America, Africa, to get the raw earths and the metals and minerals and fuel that we need? This doesn't make any sense. So let's think about this for a moment. If we really care about the environment, which I think every Alaskan does, contrary to what some people may say, or contrary to what you may read in the newspaper, we all care about the environment. No one does resource extraction or development better than Alaska does. So let's imagine for a moment we stop all that. We still need oil, we still need gas, we still need gold, we still need timber. Where's it going to go? Overseas. What's happening in places like Borneo? What's happening in places like Indonesia? What's happening in places in South America, in Africa? They don't have the environmental regulations that we have. In some cases, they have no regulations. And so we, pushing those industries overseas, will actually cause the environment in those countries to degrade faster than you can imagine. If those industries are kept here in the state of Alaska, we provide the jobs for Alaskans. We provide the wealth for Alaska. We provide the revenue for Alaska and for our local municipalities. And we protect the environment. And we can do it sustainably here in the state of Alaska. So it's something to think about. For those of us in the audience, or those of us in Alaska that may be supportive of these groups, let's think about a balance for Alaska. It doesn't have to be either or. We don't have to be a slash and burn state. That's not necessary. But at the same time, we don't have to zip it up and tie it up and put it behind a glass frame and let people just look at it. In other words, we can be both. We can develop our resources in a responsible manner, create wealth for our state, create revenue for our state, and create jobs for our people like we used to do. So this is one of the reasons why I've been meeting with the president. This is one of the reasons why I've been back east talking to investors and those in the news. Because I want them to be aware of what Alaska is. A lot of times, I don't know if you talk with folks down south, but if they haven't been to Alaska, it's only what they read. And my wife is in Inupiaq. We still get the question, do you guys live in igloos? We still get that. It's 2019, and the answer, of course, is no, we don't live in igloos. We've got global warming here in Alaska, so we can't keep the igloos up. But nonetheless, we have to determine, this is going to be a big discussion, because I'm going to have this discussion every day with folks in the legislature as well that say to me, Dunleavy, we cannot cut any more programs. They're just too important. They're too important for our kids. They're too important for our old people. They're too important for the most vulnerable in our society, and I agree with them. But I'm hoping that they step up and lock arms with myself and with other like-minded legislators and say, we need to develop our resources. Because if any of you remember the history on the discussion related to Alaska becoming a state, forget when we became a possession under Johnson, Seward, President Johnson at the time, and then Seward was the Secretary of State after Lincoln was assassinated. The discussions on statehood was, can Alaska pay for itself? They really didn't want us to become a state because we were so big, right? I always go through this exercise. We would be the 17th largest country on the face of the earth. We're the furthest northern state. You guys have heard this, right? We're the furthest western state, right? We're the furthest eastern state. Did you know that? The only thing we're not is the furthest southern state. We are so far west and so far east that we are closer to Australia than California is. That's our location on the globe. Think about that for a moment. But nonetheless, they didn't think we could make it as a state. They didn't think we had the population to make it as a state because they didn't think we could impose a broad-based tax. Have you heard that phrase lately? A broad-based tax on the people of Alaska, because we were spread out over a subcontinent. But finally, we convinced them that we could by collectivizing our resources under the government. In Alaska, you can't own the gas and oil under your feet. The government does. So think about this for a moment. We came into the possession of the United States because of our resources. We became a state because we convinced the federal government we can make a go out of it if we develop our resources. But if we're going to enter upon an era now where we can't develop our resources, where we don't want to develop our resources, at the time, at this point in history in which the world needs our resources more than ever, it doesn't bode well for Alaska. So we're really at a turning point, a crossroads, a Y in the road as to where Alaska is going to go. The people down south love Alaska. I had a conversation, I went back east with a older woman. She was one of the nicest people I ever met. She's never been to Alaska. But she told me for 35 minutes everything we're doing wrong in Alaska, how we have to fix Alaska, and how you don't want to make it like our state, New Jersey. That was the one thing I agreed with her on, by the way, if anyone's from New Jersey, okay? Anyway, so you have well-intentioned folks that believe that they are doing something good coming from the heart to help save our state from ourselves. But at the same time, that's going to put us on a course, potentially, to insolvency. That's going to put us on a course to where your businesses are impacted, because your businesses need what? They need demand. We need more jobs here. We need more people here so that we have more demand for housing and insurance and restaurants and clothing stores and cars and all of that stuff. The banks need us here for that reason, more people here. So there's more demand. But it's not going to happen if we close off our resources, number one. Number two, if we close off our resources, we can't help, if you believe in this, and to an extent I do. We can't help with the new economy. We can't help with renewables. We can't help if we close ourselves off. We have to go to China, which, by the way, China has figured this out. China is all over the world, investing in places that don't have environmental regulations. So China is not only safeguarding their rare earths, they produce 90% of the rare earths. So those of you that have cell phones, those of you that have computers, if you have solar panels, if you have batteries, big batteries in your house that hold that power, most of that stuff comes from China. But again, Alaska has the ability if we want it. So what does Alaska have? We have at least 15 out of the 23 world rare earths that have been identified in the world. As a matter of fact, out in western Alaska by Nome, we have one of the largest flake graphite deposits on the planet that was discovered here not too long ago by Nome, Alaska. And here's the other interesting thing about Alaska's resources. Do you see any oil wells in Anchorage? No. Do you see any mining rigs in downtown Anchorage? No. I lived in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where there was the mouth of the mines were all over the places where you lived there. But the point I'm trying to make is this. A lot of these places where these resources are located in the state of Alaska are located in rural Alaska, which is some of the poorest, have some of the poorest conditions, the most poverty in our entire state. Whether it's out by Bristol Bay, whether it's up by Kotzebue, Alaska, whether it's on the North Slope, certain parts of Southeast Alaska. These deposits are located where they could do the most good for people of those regions, for jobs, for taxes, for programs, right there. But if we're going to say no to development in Alaska, we're going to push it overseas. We're going to push the wealth overseas, the jobs overseas, the opportunity overseas. We're also going to push the possibility, most likely the probability, that the environment overseas will be degraded because of our actions here in the United States of America. And then we also don't get the ability to help with this potential new economy using our rare earths and our minerals. We have potential cobalt located in the Bornite Play in the Brooks Range. Boken Mountain in southeast Alaska has a multitude of rare earth oxides, so much so. Is anyone from southeast there? This is Anchorage. Oh, got somebody there, came up from southeast. They're looking at putting a processing plant on Prince of Wales Island to not only process those rare earths, if it's a go, but to actually bring rare earths in from all over North America and potentially South America to process there. Wouldn't that be a good thing if you want a job? Wouldn't that be a good thing if you want income and wealth for that area? I think so. The Ray Mountains in the interior of Alaska hold tungsten, tin, and additional rare earths. There are actually many, many places in the state of Alaska that we've identified that have rare earths and very vital strategic metals. We also have traditional industries, and I just want to touch upon them because we don't want to lose sight of that. In the Arctic, obviously, we have companies such as Conoco, Hillcorp, and Oil Search that are investing well over $1 million and have invested over several billion dollars the last couple of years to increase our output. Our oil output is projected to increase by 200,000 to 300,000 barrels over the next 7 years. That's great news for Alaska. It's great news for the world. It's great news for people that drive cars and heat their homes. In Southeast Alaska, you've probably heard this in the news as well, we have the largest rainforest in North America, the Tongass. It borders the Chugach rainforest, which is the second largest in the United States. The Tongass National Forest used to have a robust timber industry. Over, I think, 4,000 people at one time were employed in that industry, and I think today it's about 400. Now, why did that happen? This is an example of what we're talking about. Did we run out of trees? No. Did we run out of demand for those trees? No. What happened was the politics changed under the Clinton administration, and the roadless rule came into being, as well as no cutting of old growth timber. So we have a beautiful forest down there. Now remember, there's a difference between a forest and a national park. Would you agree? A national park and preserve is to be kept just the way it is, for reasons. But a forest is a multi-use forest that's managed for a whole host of things. Not just to look at, but for its timber, its mining, its tourism potential, and recreation by individuals. That's what the Tongass National Forest was, but it's being treated now as if it's a national preserve. We want to get everything back into balance if we can, so that we can have resources, developing our resources, as well as jobs for people, wealth for communities, and revenue for government. I'm going to get towards the end here in just a moment. So, as we mentioned, we've got a lot of folks that are pushing against this. We've got a lot of organizations that are working against bringing balance back to Alaska. We have many groups that are attempting to shut Alaska down. One of the reasons, like I said, I go back east is to talk with the president to see how we can open up Alaska, create more jobs, because again, as we discussed, if we don't have demand in Alaska, then we don't have growth in our economy. If we don't have growth in our economy, you could end up with a spiral in many instances. So how is Alaska doing economically? I'm going to read a couple statistics to you as I flip through this book here. So right now, Anchorage's unemployment rate is at 4.8%. It's not bad. It's not the best in the nation, but it's not bad. The state of Alaska's unemployment rate is 6.1%. Last quarter it was 6.2, which is a record low. It's still trending downward. And there's a belief that as more people are hired on the slope for winter work, it'll go towards 6%. And if it does that, we get close to an unemployment rate that we've never seen in the state of Alaska. We have our personal income growth is up, it's the highest it's been in 10 years. New wages, $350 million in new wages in the state of Alaska this past year. We also have, let me find it here. We also have record investment on the slope. And we're looking at $500 to $700 million of investment at the international airport. One of the things that we put together is a Alaska development team when I first came into office. We've talked about diversifying this economy for decades and decades and decades. And we haven't really been able to do that. We're starting that process now. We're going out and meeting with investors, and we're asking them, what is it going to take for you to come to the state of Alaska? What do we have to offer in the state of Alaska that you want? And what can we do to make things better? One of the assets that I alluded to, but I'll just touch upon now, is our location. Remember what I said, Seward bought Alaska because of our location, also our resources. This is one of the reasons why we get an opportunity to meet with the president when he goes to Asia. Stops here so we can have the conversation. And every time he flies over, he does call us and say, we're coming up. Is there stuff you want to talk to about Alaska? And we do. But we have the second busiest cargo airport in the United States of America, right here. And we have the fifth busiest in the entire world, right here, and it's growing rapidly. As I just mentioned, $500 to $700 million of new investment. This is going to produce a lot of jobs for Alaska, produce a lot of jobs for Anchorage. What's interesting is that Fairbanks is actually closer to the lower 48 from Asia. It's just the way the Great Circle route actually operates. And so we're working also at trying to get some more investment up in Fairbanks at that international airport. We have a large military presence in Alaska that we believe is going to grow. And why do I say that? Because the Arctic is changing. It is warming. There's no doubt about it. Did anybody get to the point last year where they went to Lowe's and bought a fan in July? You were out of luck. Who would have thought, right? Who would have thought that you run out of fans and air conditioners in the state of Alaska? I mean, at that point, I think all of us have become pretty convinced that things are warming up. And they are. So what's this going to do for Alaska? China has declared itself an Arctic nation. China has declared itself an Arctic nation. And they are building ships, including icebreakers. There's no ice around China, but they have their eyes on the Arctic. Because the Arctic, especially offshore, is one of the last unexplored areas that countries believe have tremendous amounts of wealth on the bottom of that seafloor. And so China is moving in and out of the Bering Strait. We are an Arctic nation because of Alaska. We are the Arctic nation, in my opinion. Yet we don't have the infrastructure in the Arctic. We don't have the military presence in the Arctic. We don't have the ports in the Arctic. And that's something that we have to have a discussion about as to what Alaska is going to look like going into the next 15, 20, 25, 30 years. And so that's a discussion that's just happening now. And I know that Senator Sullivan, Senator Murkowski, and Representative Young are having those discussions. But we have to move quickly on this because we are warming, and we have to have, I think, a more robust presence in the state of Alaska. That will grow our military presence. That will grow demand in the state of Alaska. That will help with demand for housing and food and clothing and banking services, like I said earlier. And so as we look to the future of Alaska, my question to you is, what kind of future do you want? Does it have to be an either or? Does it have to be either a slash and burn economy, or can it be an economy with balance where we have a beautiful state? I mean, let's face it, we probably have the most beautiful state in the country. Can we have a state that has that balance between the beauty, the quality of life, but that quality of life includes jobs for people, resources, revenue, wealth for communities? I think it can. So what are we going to look at, and I'm going to wrap it up with this, what are we going to look at in terms of the budget and the legislature this year? I'm looking at some of my legislative friends over here. They just took out some of their pens and they're going to start writing here. We had a contentious session last year. There's no doubt about it. It went on forever, and we're still having conversations about what actually occurred. When I came into office, when I was running for office in October of 2018, oil had reached $85 a barrel in October. We were making plans, if we won that election in November, a month later, we were making plans that we would work with the legislature on a step-down approach to the budget. I've been talking about this for years, many legislators have been talking about this for years, that our size of government has outstretched the capacity to pay for it. And we were living essentially on fumes. We had $16 billion in the Constitutional Budget Reserve. Then we had $14 billion. Then we had $10 billion. Then we had $7 billion. Then we knew it was coming. We knew this day was coming. And when I ran, I knew this day was coming. And I knew it wasn't going to be easy. As a result of those reductions that we did last year, we closed the gap a little bit. But the problem that we have is we have formula programs that are embedded in law that it's like a jack-in-the-box. Just when you think you ramp it down, there's pressure to spring it forward again. So the discussion that we're going to have with the legislature this year is, what do you want to do with formula programs? Because currently, it's estimated that those programs will cause growth in our budget of at least $100 million a year. So if we do nothing else, if we don't add one penny of discretionary spending, and we just keep what we have, and we allow these programs, these formula programs, to continue as they are, and these are good programs, in 10 years, you'll be looking at an additional $1 billion that has to come from somewhere. That's what we're facing. That discussion has to happen. So we're going to have a discussion on the formula programs, but we also have to have a discussion on how we can help hem those in, but also, what do we do when we come into more money? Because we're looking at 200,000 to 300,000 barrels of new oil in the future. And if you read the paper this morning in some of the outlets, fracking, there's a concern now that fracking is not going to be able to produce the amounts of oil that we need. Because there's constant investment that needs to occur in the oil industry, constant new sources of oil. And if you know anything about fracking or understand fracking, especially in Texas, there's continual movement of rigs to drill more, drill more, drill more, get more water, get more sand, fracked, and produce more oil. The issue is there's concern now that they may have reached a limit on that, yet the demand for oil is poised to grow, especially if we get the tariffs dealt with China. If that's the case, Alaska, once again, is poised to take advantage of that with our conventional pools of oil, our capacity in the pipeline, and our great infrastructure. And the other thing that we have in Alaska is we have location on the Pacific Ocean. As the politics change down south, and more states are squeezing the ability to transport resources across their borders, people are looking to Alaska potentially to transport their product. For example, you've heard of ATA, Alberta to Alaska Railroad. This has been going on for about 10 or 15 years. This discussion continues, and in some respects it's actually growing because Alberta feels that they are hemmed in with their tar sands, and they want to find a way to get it to the Pacific Ocean. So with that said, when we look at the budget this year, we put out a flat budget. The formula programs are going to force growth in that budget. We have to have a discussion with the legislature about that. I truly believe we need to look at revising our constitutional amendment, that's a spending limit that was put in place in 1981 and reaffirmed by the people of Alaska in 1986. We need to come to the realization, I believe, that if we come into 200,000 to 300,000 more barrels of oil, and if we come into the associated revenue and wealth with that, the chances are, if history teaches us anything, we're going to spend it. And if we spend it, we're going to grow the programs. They're going to be back exactly where we are today in a few years. And what we want to have is a sustainable budget going forward. One that can be predictable with its growth, but also allow enough for a capital budget to continually grow Alaska, especially if we go down the route of resource development as opposed to the other route. Constitutional amendment on spending. We have to talk about the formula programs, and we have to make a final decision as to what we want the PFD to look like as we go into the future. These will be the considerations. And I'll just say one thing before I end and open it up for questions, and that is, for those that believe that the permanent fund dividend is the answer to the future, mathematically, that's questionable, and I'll tell you why. And you're going to hear presentations from legislators. And I'm looking forward to working with the legislature this year to come up with a solution. And we all know that we're going to need to compromise and come together. We're all going to have to give a little bit to get a lot, is what I say to people. Is what we're going to have to do this year. But just something on the PFD. Our budget this year is a flat budget of $4.4 billion. There's going to be enormous pressure to increase that spending by some members of the legislature, which is going to be understandable. Right now, our revenue is projected at about $1.9 billion. So that leaves a deficit of about $2.5. Under SB 26, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds, and my staff said, oh God, don't go into the numbers, but I'll give it a shot here. $2.5 billion, we can only take $3 billion out of SB 26, out of the ERA. So at $2.5 billion, you get a $2.5 billion deficit, $3 billion, you have $500 million left for a PFD. Not the 1.6 that was traditionally there, but about 500 million for a PFD. And if there's any increased spending to the PFD, or excuse me, to the government, which it sounds like there's going to be an attempt to do that, you could be looking at a dividend that is very small. The question is, will the people of Alaska, is that something that they will accept? And if our spending keeps increasing at the rate it's increasing without a constitutional safeguard, spending limit, there is a probability in the next 2 years that that entire $3 billion that comes out of the earnings reserve, the solution to the problem, the PFD, will be consumed by government spending. But I want to say this as I end. I'm going to end now, let you guys ask questions. I am incredibly optimistic for the state of Alaska. I believe we will come to solutions this year with the legislature and the people of Alaska. I am hopeful that we will find balance in our ability to develop our resources and keep a beautiful Alaska from being ruined in terms of the environment. I believe that this is going to be Alaska's century. I believe that we will be the Panama Canal of the North. I believe you will see more and more shipping going past Alaska, and we have to be prepared for that. I have 3 daughters. They were born here. They're going to be raised here. And I'm incredibly optimistic that with your help, the people of Alaska, private industry, private sector, that we're going to have an Alaska that we can all be proud of, that our grandkids can be proud of, and that they can look back and say that these people today, this generation today, handed us an Alaska in better shape than they got. So with that, I want to thank you, wish you a happy New Year's, and I'm here to take questions.